I knew something was wrong the moment my dog started barking at the porch in the middle of the afternoon. It wasn't the normal mailman bark. It was sharper, urgent, like he could smell that something didn't belong. I went to the door just in time to see the tail end of a brown Amazon box disappearing around the corner of my house. If you're watching this and you've ever had something stolen off your porch, you know the mix of anger and helplessness that hits you. But this wasn't a one-time thing. For weeks, my orders had been marked delivered, yet my porch stayed empty. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I realized it was a pattern. Someone was watching my deliveries, and they knew exactly when to strike. Before I tell you how far this went, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest. You're going to want to hear how my neighbor went from smug thief to pale, stuttering wreck in just one conversation. The first time it happened, I ordered a phone charger. $10. Not worth fighting over. Then it was a set of headphones, then a pair of shoes for my wife's birthday. Each time the tracking said, delivered at 1:14 p.m. or left at front door 3:37 p.m. And each time, nothing. The delivery photos showed the box sitting on my welcome mat, proof that it had been there. But by the time I got home from work, it was gone. I complained to Amazon. They refunded me, but their tone made it clear this couldn't go on forever. Too many claims could result in an account review. Great. So not only was someone stealing my property, they were putting my ability to order anything online at risk. I asked my other neighbors if they'd seen anything. Most shook their heads. One said, probably kids. But the timing didn't make sense. Whoever was doing it was precise, within minutes of the package being dropped off. Kids don't stalk Amazon vans. Adults do. It was when I was watering my front lawn one Saturday that I noticed something. Across the street, leaning against his fence, was Greg, my next-door neighbor. Mid-40s, always in a baseball cap, the kind of guy who gave you a nod but never a smile. He had a beer in one hand and his phone in the other. His eyes weren't on me. They were on the delivery van that had just turned onto our street. I watched him watch it. His gaze tracked the van like a hawk. As it pulled up to my house, his phone came up, like he was taking a photo, or maybe noting the time. I caught the faintest smirk before he turned and walked toward his backyard. 10 minutes later, I accidentally looked over the fence. Greg was gone. So was the package that had been left by my door. I wanted to storm over right then. But I also knew people like Greg don't admit anything unless you shove the proof in their face. And even then, they'll twist it until you're the bad guy. So I decided to wait. Watch, collect. Over the next 2 weeks, I started keeping a log. Delivery times, Greg's comings and goings, which way he walked when he took out the trash. I noticed that whenever the Amazon van came, Greg somehow found a reason to be outside, raking leaves, checking his mailbox, fiddling with his car. And each time, within minutes of a package hitting my porch, it vanished. The anger built up in me like a pressure cooker. I'd work all day, come home, and see that little photo on my tracking page, the box on my mat, and know it was already sitting in Greg's garage. And it wasn't just my stuff. I heard Mrs. Lang 2 doors down complaining about a missing blender. Jason next to her lost a set of golf balls he'd ordered for his brother's birthday. It was like someone was bleeding the street dry, one cardboard box at a time. By the 3rd week, I knew I had to act. But I didn't want to just catch him. I wanted him to feel the same pit-in-your-stomach dread that I'd felt every time I saw "delivered" and opened my door to nothing. So I bought something special, not valuable, at least not to anyone but me. It was a decoy, but one that would tell me exactly what I needed to know. Alongside it, I picked up a motion-activated camera with night vision and a silent alert system that pinged my phone the moment it detected movement. I installed it above my porch light, angled perfectly to catch anyone stepping onto my welcome mat. The first day the setup was live, nothing happened. The second day, still nothing. But on the third, I got the ping. My phone vibrated in my pocket while I was in the kitchen making coffee. I opened the app and there he was. Greg, baseball cap, beer gut, stepping casually onto my porch like it was his. He looked down, saw the box, and smiled. That was when I knew I had him. What I didn't know, yet, was that when I confronted him, the color would drain from his face for a reason that went far beyond stolen Amazon boxes. The first time I watched the clip all the way through, my hands were steady. By the third replay, they weren't. Greg didn't just grab the package and bolt. He paused, scanned the street with the lazy confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times, then angled the box so the shipping label faced away from his body, like he knew cameras could read barcodes. He didn't look up at mine. He didn't have to. He moved like a man who believed the world wasn't watching. I downloaded the footage, saved it in 3 places, and printed stills. Then I did something I hadn't done since college. I took notes like my grade depended on it. Date, time, weather, which neighbor's car was gone, which lawn service was out, whether kids were playing on the cul-de-sac. Patterns hide in details. I started waking up early. The Amazon routes on our street hit around lunch on weekdays and mid-afternoon on Saturdays. On those days, I pretended to wash the car or fuss with the mailbox. I wasn't trying to scare him. I wanted him comfortable. The more comfortable he felt, the sloppier he'd be. At noon that Tuesday, I watched the van slow by Mrs. Lang's house. A medium box, light enough for the driver to carry one-handed, hit her porch. 5 minutes later, I heard Greg's side gate click. He didn't go for hers. He walked past her driveway without a glance, crossed to mine, and stared at my doorbell like it had insulted him. Then he kept going. No package on my porch, no theft. He just needed to know. That was when I realized he wasn't stealing at random. He was stealing by schedule. My schedule. That night I called the non-emergency line. The officer was polite but bored. "If you can get a clear face and proof the items were yours, we can take a report," he said. Proof meant receipts, serial numbers, packaging, things normal people throw away. When I asked whether porch thefts even got prosecuted, he sighed. Sometimes. Depends what else is going on. Translation: don't hold your breath. I told our HOA president, the kind of woman who weaponizes newsletters. She nodded gravely, promised to raise awareness, and sent an email reminding everyone to bring in packages promptly and consider decorative lockboxes that cost more than my missing headphones. Greg was CC'd on the thread. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji. If authority wasn't going to help, coordination might. I waited for the driver on Friday. The tall guy with a sleeve of roses inked up his arm. "Hey," I said, holding up a bottle of water. "Can I ask you something weird?" He laughed. "I've heard worse." I told him our porch pirate problem without pointing across the street. He rubbed his jaw, thinking. "I can't change your delivery window, but I can text you when I'm 2 stops out," he said, tapping his phone. Off the record. I gave him my number, thanked him like he'd handed me a key. Saturday morning, I built a box. Not cardboard. A plywood cube, painted Amazon brown, with an old label I peeled off a previous shipment and taped on like a trophy. Inside, I placed a cheap Bluetooth speaker that could be pinged from my phone, a coin roll for weight, and a tile tracker tucked under a flap. If Greg lifted the lid, he'd see nothing but packing paper. If he walked off with it, I'd know exactly where it napped. At 3:06 p.m., my phone buzzed. 2 stops out. I set the decoy on the mat and stepped back into the kitchen, blinds angled to give me a perfect view without a silhouette. The camera watched. My dog watched. I watched my phone. Movement. Greg again, hat low, shoulders loose. He reached the steps, looked down, and hesitated. He bent, then didn't pick it up. He tilted his head, listening. For a 6-second, I thought I'd left the speaker on. I hadn't. He ran his fingers along the tape seam, then under the box, feeling for... what? Magnets? A sensor? He lifted it half an inch, then set it back down, shook his head, and walked away. He'd learned to say no. That should have frustrated me. It didn't. It told me he was careful when things didn't match his script. So I changed my script. The next delivery was a real one. Water filters I actually needed. The driver texted. The box landed. I didn't touch it. I waited. Greg didn't appear. 15 minutes. 20. I gave up, opened the door, bent to lift, and heard the gate click. He'd waited me out. He wanted the rush of taking it from me, not the porch. I stepped back inside, left the box on the entry table, and watched through the side window as he pretended to check his mailbox, then his landscaping lights, then his car's front tire, inching closer to my walkway, like a deer testing a new fence. He wasn't going to try my door in broad daylight. Even he wasn't that arrogant. But he wanted to know if I'd cracked, if the presence of a real delivery meant my vigilance had slipped. It hadn't. I let him loiter until his wife yelled from inside, and he retreated. That night, I moved the camera. The porch angle was good, but it didn't see the approach. I tucked a second lens, tiny, battery-powered, disguised as a motion light, under the eave where it watched the sidewalk and the street. I set the alert sensitivity lower this time. I wanted the ping only when someone crossed onto my concrete. On Wednesday, a small victory. The tile I'd slipped into a padded envelope on Mrs. Lang's porch started moving at 1:32 p.m. It didn't go to her house. It made a short trip east, stopped for 2 minutes, then crossed the street and landed in a 20-foot radius that included only 3 possible destinations: Greg's garage, Greg's kitchen, or Greg's den. I knocked on his door with a printout of the route in my pocket and a calm I didn't feel. His wife opened. She wore a bathrobe and an expression like a curtain. "Can I help you?" "Sorry to bother you," I said, smiling too much. "Package mix-up on the block today. Wondered if anything meant for us ended up here." She looked at the entry table. Empty. "Nope." "Mind if I check the porch? Sometimes drivers tuck things behind planters." Her mouth thinned. "We'll bring it over if we see something." Door. Closed. The tile said it hadn't moved. The camera said Greg's truck had returned 20 minutes after the alert. The log said the driver's route that day put him outside my house at 1:27, Mrs. Lang's at 1:30. The math did itself. I didn't show Greg the footage. Not yet. People like him operate on 2 energies: greed and denial. If you hit them with a fact too soon, they turn denial into a shield. If you let greed keep walking, it will carry the shield right into a wall. I baited him again, smaller this time. A bubble mailer, obviously liked, tossed on my mat at 11:58 a.m. by a friend doing a favor. Inside, a folded sheet of paper and a nail. Not to hurt anyone, to feel. Any real envelope that size has a shape. This one had weight in the wrong place. Greg came at 12:12. He palmed it, squeezed, frowned. He didn't take it. He looked at my doorbell like he could hear it thinking and went home. So he was cautious. Until he wasn't. The slip came on a windy afternoon when the sky went pewter and our block emptied for school pickup. Amazon dropped a mid-sized box at 2:41. At 2:46, the alert hit. Not Greg. A teenage boy in a hoodie jogged up, looked left, grabbed the box, ran. I was out the door before he reached the sidewalk. "Hey!" He froze like deer in an open field. "Put it back." He did, eyes flicking past me to someone behind my hedges. I followed the glance and caught a shadow moving. The brim of a cap, the top of a jacket. By the time I rounded the hedge, the sidewalk was empty. No teenager operates solo that cleanly. Someone had sent him to test my reaction time. That night, I walked the dog longer than usual. When I passed Greg's driveway, a half-dozen flattened Amazon boxes leaned inside the blue recycle bin. The labels were torn meticulously in half. Most people rip along the tape and toss. He'd removed every code that could be scanned, every name that could be read, then folded the cardboard like a ritual. Greed and denial and control. I started talking to neighbors the way door-to-door salesmen used to. Not about theft, about routine. "You usually home around 3? Your nanny's car is the gray Honda, right? Do you still get those dog food bags monthly?" People love to narrate their lives in small pieces. They think it makes them interesting. It makes them predictable. When I mapped our block against the driver's texts, I saw the gaps. Empty porches, big boxes, weekday windows. I watched Greg move through those gaps like water finds cracks. On Sunday, Jason from 2 doors down mentioned his ring had caught some movement. He shrugged. "Could be a cat." I asked to see it. We scrolled. At 4:18 a.m., a figure in a cap, always the cap, slipped along the sidewalk, paused at my gate, kept going. He wasn't stealing at night then. He was scouting. The next morning, my camera caught him again, this time with a clipboard. He didn't approach my porch. He stood by the curb, wrote something down, and walked away. The list in my notebook was getting long. Dates, times, license plate sightings, the make of the teenager's shoes, which streetlight flickered at the corner. It felt paranoid until it didn't. It felt obsessive until I opened my email and saw, "Your return has been initiated," on an order I hadn't returned. Someone had accessed my Amazon account and started a refund. Not money, store credit. It wasn't a hack that cost me anything yet. It was a hand on my shoulder testing whether I'd notice. I changed my password. I added 2-factor authentication. I called Amazon and had them flag my account. Then I did one more thing. I created a second account with a different email and shipped a box not to my house, but to a locker at the grocery store 3 blocks away. In my real account, I ordered nothing for 3 days. The street went quiet. Greg mowed his lawn. He waved at the UPS guy. He reset. On the 4th day, the driver texted, "Heavy box, 2 out." I walked to the corner and waited where I could see Greg's porch without being on it. The van stopped. The box landed. I didn't move. 10 minutes later, Greg came out. Not for the box, but to wheel his trash can 1 foot to the left, set it down, adjust its angle. Step back, look, adjust again. Then he went back inside. The camera time-stamped the door closing. 3 minutes later, the side gate clicked. He wanted a line of retreat that didn't show on the front lens. I felt something cold slide into place. He wasn't just a petty thief hoping for easy grabs. He was a planner who liked to feel smarter than everyone around him. People like that don't go pale over a porch video. They go pale when the scaffolding they built to hold their ego starts to wobble. I set my phone on the kitchen table and watched the screen until the notification came in. Motion detected, front path. I didn't head for the door. I headed for the garage. I opened the side door silently and stepped into the strip of shade between our houses. Through the gap in the fence slats, I saw an elbow, a sliver of cap, the curve of a shoulder moving toward my porch with slow, precise steps, the clipboard tucked under his arm like it belonged there. I let him pass. Then I went back inside and waited for the sound I knew by then better than my own doorbell. Cardboard sliding against denim, the careful out-breath he gave when he lifted something a little heavier than it looked, the almost silent satisfaction of a practiced hand closing around what wasn't his. The next morning, I decided to get up earlier than usual. Not because I was suddenly more disciplined, but because I wanted to see if he would do it again. If my neighbor really had the audacity to take something off my porch in broad daylight, I needed to catch every second of it on camera. I made my coffee and sat by the window, the blinds barely open, the new security camera's live feed running on my laptop. The street was quiet, the kind of silence that makes you suspicious. 8 to 12 a.m. A white sedan pulled into his driveway. He got out, wearing the same gray hoodie as yesterday. He didn't even glance toward my house at first. Instead, he opened his trunk, pulled out a brown cardboard box, and walked inside. It wasn't from Amazon. No tape, no label. Probably one of his own. 8:47 a.m. A delivery van stopped in front of my house. My heart started pounding, not from excitement over whatever I'd ordered, but from knowing what was about to happen. The driver placed a medium-sized Amazon box on my porch. I let it sit there, even though every part of me wanted to go out and grab it. I needed proof. 9:05 a.m. He came out again, hoodie up, hands in pockets. He pretended to be checking his phone as he crossed the street. My blood boiled as I watched him casually bend down, pick up my package, and walk away. Not into his house this time, but straight into his garage, closing the door behind him. I almost stormed over right then and there. But I stopped myself. No, I told myself. If I wanted this to end for good, I needed more than a confrontation. I needed undeniable evidence. Over the next week, it became a game for him. Every package that arrived, big or small, vanished within the hour. He was sloppy about it too, sometimes glancing up at my camera without realizing it was recording, other times trying to hide the box under his sweatshirt like some cheap shoplifter. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I wanted to wait until I had enough footage to make him squirm. On Friday, I finally got the perfect shot. Him opening one of my boxes right there in his driveway, pulling out the contents, and tossing the packaging into his recycling bin. He didn't even try to hide it. That evening, I knocked on his door. He opened it halfway, eyes narrowing when he saw me. "Yeah," he said flatly. I smiled, holding up my phone. "Hey, I think you've been getting some of my deliveries by mistake." He shrugged. "Haven't seen anything." "Really?" I tapped the screen, and the video started playing. Him, hoodie up, my package in his hands, his face as clear as day. The color drained from his cheeks. "You," he started, but stopped. His eyes darted to the side, like he was calculating how bad this could get. I leaned in a little. "You've been at this for weeks. I've got every single one on camera. So here's what's going to happen." His Adam's apple bobbed like he was swallowing glass. For a second, the smug, lazy posture I'd gotten used to was gone. He stood there stiff, hand still on the doorknob, knuckles pale. "I don't know what you think you've got there," he began, voice low, trying for calm, but the edges were fraying. "Oh, I know exactly what I've got," I cut in. I held the phone higher, thumb resting on the share icon. "Crystal clear footage, timestamps, multiple incidents. You've been stealing from me, from others on this street. And this?" I nodded toward his garage. "It's not just about a couple of boxes anymore." His gaze flicked behind him toward the dark interior of the garage, just for a fraction of a second. But it was enough. There was something in there he didn't want me to see. Something bigger than headphones or birthday shoes. "You can delete that video," he said. But it was more plea than command. "Or," I countered, "I can send it to the police, our HOA, and every neighbor on this block before dinner." He hesitated, jaw working. "What do you want?" I stepped back just enough to look like I wasn't blocking his doorway, but not enough to break eye contact. "First, every single thing you've taken from me. Today. And then you're going to tell me about everything else you've been doing while you've been playing porch pirate." He laughed, but it was dry, cracked at the edges. "You think you can just—" "I know I can," I said, cutting him off again. "Because you know what's worse than the cops finding out you stole packages? The cops finding out what else you've got going on in there." That hit him, hard. His lips parted, but nothing came out. A car rolled past, its tires crunching over gravel. Greg stepped halfway out onto his porch, glancing up and down the street, then back at me. "Fine, come in." I followed him into the garage. The smell hit me first, a mix of gasoline, mildew, and something faintly chemical. Stacked along the back wall were flattened Amazon boxes, neatly tied with twine, labels meticulously removed. But next to them— "That's interesting," I said. A pair of brand new power tools, still in their packaging, sat on a folding table. Next to them, a row of sealed electronics, tablets, cameras, even a laptop box. None of it looked like it had ever belonged to me. "Don't touch those," he snapped, stepping between me and the table. "Not mine?" I asked. "They're returns for work." "Right," I said slowly, glancing at the shelf to his left. It was stacked with small, inconspicuous packages, the kind you could slip into a backpack or under a jacket. Each one had a scribbled note taped to it: names, dates, addresses. I recognized at least 2 of them as belonging to people in our neighborhood. "You've been stealing from more than just me," I said, my voice even. "And keeping a ledger." His face tightened. "You don't understand—" "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said. "You've been running your little side business right under everyone's noses. And here's the thing. The video of you taking my stuff, that's just the hook. The rest of this?" I swept my hand toward the shelves. "That's the weight that'll drag you under." He rubbed his temple, muttering something I couldn't catch. Then, louder, "What do you want to make this go away?" "I'll let you know," I said. "For now, I'm taking my things, all of them. You can leave them on my porch in an hour. No note, no conversation. If even one thing's missing." I let the sentence hang, tapping my phone so the video looped again. Greg stared at me for a long moment, then finally looked away. "Fine." I turned to leave, but as I reached the door, I added, "Oh, and Greg, you might want to start being nicer to your wife. Cameras pick up more than just theft." He froze in place. The color drained from his face even more than before. And that's when I knew. Whatever he thought was on my camera scared him far more than the packages ever could. I walked back to my house, not looking over my shoulder. I didn't have to. I could feel him watching me, calculating, wondering how much I'd really seen, and whether I'd already told someone else. That night, just before midnight, I got the alert from my porch cam. Motion detected. I checked the feed. And there was Greg, in sweatpants and a hoodie, placing 2 large boxes gently on my welcome mat. He didn't knock, he didn't linger. He just left them and disappeared into the shadows. When I brought them inside, they weren't just my missing items. There was more. Things I'd never ordered. Things I knew didn't belong to me. It wasn't a peace offering. It was a message. I didn't open the boxes right away. Instead, I lined them up in my kitchen like evidence in a case file. My own missing packages, the shoes for my wife, the headphones, the water filters, sat next to things I'd never seen before. A brand new DSLR camera, still sealed, 2 boxed smartwatches, and a heavy, shrink-wrapped brick of what looked like high-end power tools. I photographed everything from multiple angles. Labels, barcodes, even the way the tape was cut. Then I slid the boxes I didn't recognize into a large plastic tub and locked it in my closet. Not because I planned to keep them, but because I wanted Greg to wonder if I would. By morning, the paranoia had already set in. I could feel it. When I took the dog out, Greg was in his driveway, pretending to check the oil in his truck. He glanced up, eyes flicking to my porch like he was checking for something. I gave him a casual wave. He didn't wave back. At 10:14 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We're good now, right?" I didn't reply. I wanted silence to work on him. By noon, I had my next move planned. I printed one of the stills from my footage. Greg, hoodie up, package in hand, timestamp clear. I slipped it into an unmarked envelope with a single post-it note. "This is nothing compared to what else I've got." That evening, when he took his trash out, I walked past like I was heading to my mailbox and slid the envelope onto the lid of his recycling bin. No words, just a nod. The next morning, the envelope was gone. Greg was gone too, his truck missing from the driveway until late afternoon. When he came back, he didn't look at me. But that night, my cameras caught him standing across the street, hands in his pockets, staring at my house for a solid 30 seconds before walking away. The unspoken part of this game was that neither of us wanted to go to the police, at least not yet. He didn't want the thefts traced back to him, and I wanted him to live with the constant weight of not knowing what I'd do next. On Wednesday, I pushed harder. I left a package on my porch, real Amazon tape, but inside was nothing but a copy of the HOA bylaws and a note. "You're not the only one with eyes on you." I knew he'd take it. He did, less than 20 minutes after it arrived. The next morning, my mailbox held a small padded envelope. No return address. Inside was $200 in cash and another note. "Let's forget this." Now I knew he was scared. Cash meant desperation, and desperation meant he was picturing outcomes he couldn't control. I didn't take the money. I left it in my mailbox all day, knowing he'd see it was untouched. That night, it was gone. Thursday, I escalated again. I walked past his driveway while he was washing his truck and said, "Funny thing about cameras, Greg, they don't just see you when you think they do." Then I kept walking. I didn't have to spell it out. The look on his face told me he was running through every time he'd stepped outside, every careless moment in his garage, every late-night movement in the shadows. I'd made the playing field bigger than just the thefts. By Friday, I noticed changes. His garage door stayed shut. His wife parked her car in the street instead of the driveway. The recycling bin, once overflowing with flattened boxes, now sat nearly empty. He'd even moved the security camera above his own porch, tilting it toward the street like he was the one watching now. The thing was, he wasn't watching me. He was watching for someone else. Someone I'd made him believe might be watching both of us. Saturday morning, I got the confirmation I didn't even know I was waiting for. My motion cam pinged at 5:42 a.m., well before sunrise. The grainy night vision feed showed Greg creeping across the street, hoodie up, holding a large duffel bag. He didn't go to my porch. He went to his own truck, tossed the bag in the back seat, and drove off without headlights. When he returned an hour later, the bag was gone. His face was pale, his movements jerky. Whatever he'd done, he wanted it gone before anyone else could see it. I decided then I wasn't going to the police yet. Not until I knew exactly what was in that garage and what he'd been moving under the cover of night. Because the more I saw, the more I realized this wasn't just about stolen Amazon packages anymore. This was something bigger, something that explained why his hands shook every time I mentioned cameras. And I was going to find out what it was, even if it meant pushing him until he broke. I didn't sleep much after seeing that duffel bag. The image replayed in my mind. Greg moving like a man carrying something that couldn't afford daylight, his eyes darting even though the street was dead quiet. Whatever was in that bag, it wasn't stolen sneakers or kitchen appliances. The next morning, I decided to walk my dog earlier than usual. The air was cold and wet, and the street was still empty except for Greg's recycling bin, which sat at the curb even though pickup day wasn't until Thursday. That was odd. He was careful about routine. I glanced inside as I walked past. No cardboard this time. Instead, there were black plastic bags tied tight, each one about the size of a loaf of bread. They were heavy enough to sag the bin's sides. Not illegal to throw away, but weird. When I got home, I pulled up the past week's camera footage. I wasn't looking for package theft anymore. I was scanning for patterns. And sure enough, I found them. The night before the duffel bag run, Greg had been in and out of his garage 5 times between 1 and 3 a.m., each time carrying something small and wrapped. He loaded them into the bed of his truck, then covered them with a tarp. He wasn't selling packages. He was moving inventory. I thought about calling the police right then. But the truth is, I wanted more. If I turned him in now, he'd have excuses, maybe even allies. But if I caught him with something that couldn't be explained away as a mix-up, he'd be done for good. So I baited the hook. I left another package on my porch, but this time I made sure it looked expensive, a large, glossy box with fake Apple branding. Inside was nothing but packing foam, but I tucked a tiny GPS tracker in the corner, taped in place so it wouldn't shift. At 2:18 p.m., Greg took it. He didn't even pretend to hesitate this time. But instead of bringing it into his garage, he put it straight into the back of his truck. 10 minutes later, the GPS pinged from a storage facility 2 miles away. A storage unit. Of course, that's where the real stash would be. I didn't go there immediately, too risky. Instead, I waited until the next morning, when I knew he'd be at work. I drove past the facility and spotted his truck parked in front of Unit 146. The lock was one of those round disc types, harder to cut, but not impossible if you had time. I didn't have time, so I didn't try. I just took photos of the truck, the unit number, and the security cameras that covered the row. Then I went home and sent an anonymous tip to the facility's management, claiming that the tenant in 146 was storing stolen property. I knew they wouldn't just bust it open, but it might make them keep an eye on him. That evening, Greg was different. Jumpier. When I stepped outside to bring in my trash can, he was already in his driveway, leaning on the hood of his truck like he'd been waiting for me. "Look," he said before I could even open my mouth. "I think we got off on the wrong foot." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you call it?" "I'm saying." He glanced up and down the street. "Maybe we could help each other out here. You forget some things you think you saw, and I make it worth your while." "You already tried that," I said. "It was in my mailbox. I didn't take it." His eyes narrowed. "Then what do you want?" I smiled. "I want to know what's in Unit 146. For the first time since I'd confronted him, He didn't try to talk his way around it. He just froze, jaw tight, like I'd stepped on the one landmine he'd been praying I wouldn't see. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said finally. But his voice had gone flat, stripped of any attempt at charm. "Sure you don't," I said, turning to go. "But you might want to start thinking about who else is going to find out about it." That night, my cameras caught something new. Greg, moving fast, loading boxes into his truck under the cover of darkness. Not the careful, deliberate thief I'd been watching for weeks. This was a man in panic mode, clearing out before the walls closed in. He left around midnight and didn't come back until nearly 4 a.m. When he did, his truck bed was empty. I didn't know what he'd been storing in that unit, but I knew I'd pushed him into moving it. And that meant he was running out of safe places to hide whatever it was. The next morning, I found another envelope in my mailbox. No cash this time. Just a single sentence, printed in block letters. "Stop watching me." I laughed when I read it, because by then, it wasn't just me watching anymore. I'd made sure of that. The note in my mailbox was meant to intimidate me, but it read like desperation. Greg was slipping. Careful thieves don't leave paper trails. Panicked ones do. I didn't respond. Instead, I doubled down. That morning, I dropped a copy of one of my clearest still frames. Greg, mid-step, package in hand, face perfectly visible. Into the mailbox of Mrs. Lang, 2 doors down. No explanation, no note. Just the image. I knew she'd show it to the rest of the street within 48 hours. That's how gossip worked here. Once it left one mailbox, it was public domain. By Wednesday, the shift was obvious. Neighbors started pulling in their packages the second they hit the porch. Conversations on the sidewalk got shorter when Greg walked up. Kids stopped cutting through his yard. I could feel his eyes on me more often now. Not just casual glances, full, heavy stares. Once, while I was unloading groceries, I turned and found him standing in his driveway, not moving, just watching. That evening, I made my move. I'd been in touch with a guy named Tyler, a friend of a friend who ran a private security installation business. I told him I needed a fake surveillance sweep done on my house. The point wasn't the equipment. The point was the show. Tyler showed up in a black SUV with tinted windows, wearing a polo with an embroidered eagle logo that looked official enough to pass at a glance. For 2 hours, he and another guy walked the perimeter of my property, pointing at gutters, shining flashlights under the eaves, taking notes on a clipboard. At one point, they stopped in the middle of the street to look directly at Greg's house. I didn't have to guess what Greg was doing while this was happening. My side camera caught him standing just inside his garage, peeking around the door, chewing the inside of his cheek. The next day, I got proof the message had landed. My motion cam pinged at 3:14 a.m. Greg, hoodie up, was moving through his garage again. But this time, he wasn't loading boxes. He was shredding. The camera's mic picked up the sound of the blades chewing through paper, non-stop for nearly 20 minutes. I imagined the ledger I'd seen taped to those packages, the scribbled names and dates, turning into confetti. If he thought destroying the paper trail would save him, he was more scared than I'd realized. But here's the thing about paranoia. Once it's in, it doesn't stop at one source. On Friday afternoon, I was out front talking to Jason from 2 doors down when Greg's wife pulled into their driveway. She didn't see us. She got out, opened the trunk, and pulled out a manila envelope the size of a laptop. Instead of bringing it inside, she slid it into the wheel well of Greg's truck, tucking it behind the tire. Jason raised an eyebrow. "Weird place to keep your bills," he muttered. An hour later, Greg came home. First thing he did? Check the wheel well, grab the envelope, and carry it straight into the garage. He didn't notice the new motion-activated camera I'd mounted behind my front bush, aimed perfectly at his driveway. That footage went into a fresh folder. Not because I knew what was inside the envelope yet, but because the way they were passing it told me it wasn't meant for mail service. 2 nights later, Greg got his second surprise. This one wasn't from me. At 2:41 a.m., my camera caught a dark sedan idling at the curb in front of his house. The driver didn't get out. The passenger did, a tall man in a ball cap and a heavy jacket. He walked right up to Greg's front door, rang the bell twice, waited 20 seconds, and left. Greg appeared less than a minute later, peering into the night, looking down the street like he expected the guy to still be there. The sedan didn't return. But the next day, Greg looked wrecked. Eyes bloodshot, jaw tense, hands restless. He didn't touch his truck all afternoon. By Sunday, his paranoia had gone public. He installed 2 new floodlights on the front of his house, added a second camera over his garage, and started pacing his driveway in the evenings like he was standing guard. I didn't know who the guy in the sedan was, but I knew one thing. Greg now believed he had more than one enemy, and that was perfect. Because when you're surrounded, or think you are, you start making mistakes. By Monday morning, Greg's house looked less like a suburban home and more like a bunker. Motion lights over every entry point. His garage door closed tight even when his truck wasn't there. Curtains drawn at all hours. But paranoia doesn't just make you cautious. It makes you reckless in ways you can't see until it's too late. I saw the first crack at 6:42 a.m. I was sipping coffee by the window when a delivery van pulled up in front of Mrs. Lang's house. The driver dropped a box on her porch, waved to a jogger, and left. 10 minutes later, Greg stepped outside, still in pajama pants, hair a mess, and walked straight over. No scanning the street, no hoodie, no subtlety. He just grabbed the box, tucked it under his arm, and carried it back like it belonged to him. That was unusual. Greg didn't steal from Mrs. Lang, not because he cared, but because she was the neighborhood's self-appointed watchdog. She noticed everything, and she talked. For him to risk her porch meant his control was slipping. I saved the footage, marked it Lang theft, and waited. Sure enough, by noon, Mrs. Lang was knocking on my door, furious. "Did you see it?" she demanded. I played the video. She gasped, covered her mouth, and whispered, "Oh, he's finished." By the next day, 3 more neighbors knew. I hadn't told them. I didn't need to. In our neighborhood, news traveled faster than delivery trucks. But Greg didn't react like a man who knew he'd been caught. He reacted like a man under siege. He started coming home in the middle of the day, parking his truck in different spots, leaving again without explanation. And then came Thursday night. It was just after midnight when my phone buzzed. Motion detected, side path. I opened the live feed and froze. Greg was in my yard. Not on the porch, not near the packages. In the narrow walkway between my fence and the garage, where there was nothing to take. He was moving slow, flashlight low, scanning along the wall like he was looking for something. I switched to the rear camera. There he was again, stepping into my backyard, checking under the deck, behind the shed. He wasn't stealing, he was searching. I grabbed my phone, hit record on the screen, and watched him crouch near the back corner of my property. He stayed there for a full minute, doing something with his hands, before finally standing and slipping back through the side gate. By morning, I knew what he'd done. A small black object, no bigger than a car key fob, sat wedged under the siding near the deck. A GPS tracker. I took photos, bagged it, and placed it in my lockbox. Now I had something new. Proof Greg had stepped onto my property without permission, and that he'd planted a device to track my movements. Package theft was petty compared to that. This was trespassing and stalking territory. The kind of thing police couldn't just wave off as a neighborly misunderstanding. That afternoon, I decided to push him further. I left a medium-sized package on my porch, real Amazon tape, but empty, and stayed home all day. Greg never touched it. Instead, I caught him on camera driving past my house 4 times in 2 hours, slowing each time just enough to look at the porch. That told me 2 things. 1, he suspected I was setting traps now. And 2, the tracker wasn't about packages anymore. It was about me. I made my move the next morning. I printed 3 still images from the tracker footage. Greg crouched in my yard, Greg placing the device, Greg leaving. I slipped them into an unmarked envelope and left it on his porch while he was at work. By evening, he was knocking on my door. When I opened it, he didn't try to fake casual. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, voice low but shaking. "Doing what?" I said. "You know what. You're trying to ruin me." I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. "Greg, you've been stealing from me for weeks, from the neighbors, God knows who else. You've been breaking into my yard, planting trackers. You ruined yourself. I just made sure someone noticed." His hands curled into fists, then loosened. "What do you want?" I leaned in. "I want you to know exactly how close you are to losing everything. And I want you to think about that every time you hear a car slow down outside your house." For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then he turned and walked away, not saying another word. That night, I got an alert at 3:17 a.m. My rear camera caught Greg hauling 3 large plastic tubs from his garage into his truck. He drove off without headlights again. Whatever was in those tubs, he wasn't planning to bring it back. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe I wasn't the only one who should be afraid of what he was hiding. Greg's late-night tub run stuck in my head. It wasn't the first time he'd moved things under cover of darkness. But this time felt different, more urgent, more final. It was like he was cutting ties, erasing something before it could be traced back to him. The next morning, I drove the same route I'd seen him take on the camera feed. The streets were empty, dew still clinging to the asphalt. I kept my speed steady, eyes scanning for anything that looked out of place. 3 miles out, the road curved past a stretch of overgrown brush and ended at a gravel turnout. Beyond it, an abandoned storage building sat with its windows boarded, the paint peeling in long, sun-bleached strips. There was no sign of Greg's truck, but the gravel bore fresh tire tracks, wide ones, with a tread pattern I recognized from the close-ups my porch cam had caught. I didn't get out of the car. This wasn't the place to play hero alone. I took photos of the tire marks, the building, the surrounding area. Then I drove past slowly, noting a set of heavy plastic skid marks leading toward the tree line behind the building. Greg hadn't just dropped something off. He'd hauled it out of sight. Back home, I combed through my camera archives again, this time focusing on the tubs themselves. They weren't standard storage bins. They were industrial grade, the kind used for construction materials or evidence transport. I zoomed in on one frame and caught part of a sticker on the side. BioSeal containment. My stomach tightened. I'd heard that name before, a brand of containers used for hazardous materials, including medical waste. This was officially bigger than package theft. I started digging online. BioSeal bins were expensive, regulated, and not something you picked up at a hardware store. They were sold mostly to hospitals, labs, and certain government contractors. Which begged the question, how had Greg gotten them, and what had been inside? By early afternoon, I had another clue. Jason, the neighbor 2 doors down, texted me out of the blue. Saw your boy Greg at the old quarry yesterday. Thought you'd want to know. The quarry was on the opposite side of town from the abandoned storage building. Whatever Greg was doing, he was spreading it out, stashing things in multiple places, maybe trying to make sure nothing was all in one spot. That night, I set up a new camera across the street from his house, disguised as a beat-up birdhouse on a stake. It gave me a clear shot of his driveway and garage door. At 1:56 a.m., the feed lit up. Greg was back, but this time he wasn't carrying anything out. He was bringing something in, a single smaller bioseal bin, no bigger than a carry-on suitcase, cradled in both arms like it was heavy. He didn't store it in the garage. He took it straight into the house. I watched the footage 3 times, focusing on the way he moved. This wasn't just physical strain. He was being careful, deliberate, like he was afraid of what might happen if he dropped it. The next morning, I pretended to check my mailbox while he was outside. He looked like hell, unshaven, eyes red, shoulders tense. When our eyes met, he didn't glare. He didn't smirk. He just looked tired. "Rough night?" I asked. He didn't answer, just turned and went inside. That told me more than words would have. Whatever was in that bin was eating at him. By late afternoon, the neighborhood grapevine had kicked in again. Mrs. Lang called me, whispering like she was passing state secrets. "He's been taking phone calls in the garage," she said, pacing back and forth, talking low. Once I heard him say shipment, and they can't know. Shipment, bioseal bins, midnight runs to abandoned buildings and quarries. This wasn't paranoia talking anymore. Greg was in something dangerous, and the more I pushed, the closer I was getting to the core of it. That night, I decided to break my own rule. I went into his yard. It was after 2 a.m., and his lights were off. I slipped through the side gate, sticking to the shadows, and made my way to the narrow basement window near the back. The curtains were drawn, but the faint glow of a single light bulb leaked through the edges. I crouched low, trying to get an angle. The basement was cluttered, but in the middle of the floor sat the bioseal bin. The lid was open. I couldn't see what was inside, but I could see Greg, sitting in a chair beside it, head in his hands, like a man who just realized there was no way out. I didn't know yet what he'd been hiding all this time. But I knew this. Whatever was in that container was the real reason he'd gone pale when I first showed him the footage. The packages had been nothing more than a symptom, and I was about to find the disease. I stayed crouched by that basement window longer than I should have. The cold damp seeping into my knees, the faint hum of the street lights, the only sound between us. Greg hadn't moved in minutes. His shoulders sagged, his breathing slow but heavy, like each inhale was an effort. Finally, he straightened in his chair and reached for the bioseal bin. My eyes locked on the thick yellow seal around the lid, the kind you only break once. He popped it, peeled it back, and opened the container. I leaned closer. Inside was a layer of black, vacuum-sealed pouches stacked with surgical precision. Even through the murky basement glass, I recognized the labels. Hospital inventory codes, barcodes, biohazard symbols. Some had faded like they'd been sitting for months. Others looked freshly printed. I'd half expected drugs, maybe stolen electronics. But these were medical specimens. Blood packs, vials, sealed tissue samples. Some of them bore the insignia of a hospital 2 towns over. A place that had been in the news recently for misplaced inventory and procedural irregularities. At the time, no one explained what that meant. Now, staring at Greg's basement floor, I had a pretty good idea. Greg pulled out one of the pouches and set it on the table beside him. He just stared at it, hands resting on his knees. His lips moved, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. I stayed until my legs ached, committing every detail to memory. Then I slipped back to my yard, locked my door, and downloaded the footage from my birdhouse cam and rear motion cam. Between them, I had him dead to rights. Package theft, trespassing, planting trackers, and now possession of stolen biohazard material. The next morning, I made 2 copies of everything. One went into a plain envelope and straight into my safe deposit box at the bank. The other went into a padded mailer with no return address, sent to a contact I'd quietly cultivated over the past few weeks. A local reporter with a reputation for digging deep and not letting go. I didn't hear from Greg that day, or the day after. He didn't come outside, didn't move his truck, didn't even collect his mail. On the 3rd day, the story broke. The headline hit like a hammer. Local man linked to theft of medical materials from county hospital. The article laid it out in brutal detail. Missing blood and tissue samples, suspected black market sales, health code violations that could carry federal charges. The piece didn't name me. It didn't have to. The accompanying photo, Greg, hoodie up, stealing a package from my porch, made it obvious where the investigation had started. By noon, unmarked SUVs were parked in front of his house. Agents in dark jackets went in and out, carrying bins, computers, bags of evidence. Greg was let out in cuffs, his head down, the neighborhood watching in silence. Mrs. Lang stood on her porch, arms folded, eyes sharp. When the vans pulled away, his house looked smaller somehow. The curtains still drawn, the floodlights still up, but empty. Hollow. That night, I sat on my porch with a beer. The street quiet again for the first time in months. I wasn't naive. I knew there'd be questions, maybe even follow-ups. But for now, Greg was gone. The packages stopped disappearing. The shadows around my house felt like shadows again, not eyes watching. Before going inside, I checked my mailbox one last time. Inside was a single scrap of paper, no envelope, no handwriting. Just a typed message. "You're lucky it was me they took." No name, no signature. Just those words. I stood there for a long minute, reading it over and over. The cars that slowed past Greg's house. The man in the sedan. The envelope in the truck's wheel well. The way Greg had acted like the packages were the least of his worries. The medical samples were bad enough. But maybe, just maybe, they weren't the only thing he'd been hiding. I went inside, locked the door, and checked every camera angle twice, because whatever game I'd been playing with Greg, I had the sinking feeling someone else was still playing it with me.